If Washington had been a Frenchman at a time when France was crumbling inside and invaded from outside, I would have dared him to be himself. Or, if he had persisted in being himself, he would merely have been a fool. As for me, I could only be a crowned Washington, and I could become that only at a Congress of Kings, surrounded by sovereigns whom I had either persuaded or mastered. Then, and then only, could I have profitably displayed Washington's moderation, disinterestedness, and wisdom. In all reasonableness, I could not attain this goal except by means of world dictatorship. I tried it. Can it be held against me? When I acquired the supreme direction of affairs, it was wished that I might become a Washington. Words cost nothing, and no doubt those who were so ready to express the wish did so without any knowledge of the times, places, persons, or things. Had I been in America, I would have willingly become a Washington, and I should have little merit in so being, for I do not see how I could have reasonably acted otherwise. But had Washington been in France, exposed to discord within and invasion from without, I would have defied him to have been what he was in America. At least, he would have been a fool to attempt it, and would only have prolonged the existence of evil. For my own part, I could only have been a crowned Washington.
Alrighty, I'm sorry. I hope reading that wasn't just weird, and it helped to give you some understanding of the similarities and differences between that of the American and French Revolution. I hope you were able to guess who wrote that, but if not, I will tell you now. It was none other than the former Emperor of the French, a contemporary of Washington, Napoleon Bonaparte. He wrote that in one of his many journals during the final years of his life on St. Helena. In this episode, we are not going to be talking about the Corsican. Instead, we will be talking about another contemporary of his, the hero of both worlds, America's favorite fighting Frenchman, Marquis de Lafayette. On August 5th, 1777, a 19-year-old Marquis de Lafayette met the 45-year-old commander of the Continental Army, George Washington. Washington, alongside the newly formed Continental Congress, was initially unsure of this young, inexperienced French aristocrat, viewing him simply as just another of the many rich foreigners who came to join the colony's revolution seeking glory or adventure. But what Lafayette lacked in age, he made up for with his passion. Him and Washington came from two vastly different generations, but their shared love for equal rights and revolutionary ideas made for the pair to quickly become friends. I think at this dinner, Washington was genuinely surprised and taken back at the fiery spirit of this young man who held much of his own beliefs, and Lafayette, on the other hand, was probably starstruck and simply honored to finally meet one of his heroes. Earlier in the year, back in July, before this dinner, upon Lafayette's arrival to the colonies, he immediately sought to meet with the newly formed Continental Congress, so he could plead his case to join the revolution. Most foreign aristocrats coming to the Congress expected a high pay, a high rank in the army, or wanted some other kind of reward, whether it was land or some sneaky slimy deals. But Lafayette was not like most other foreigners. He did not ask for anything. He did not even want to be paid. Lafayette simply came for glory, stupidity, ego, or, what I believe, this was a man who was genuinely passionate to serve the cause for liberty, which was an evolving definition at the time, as this period really was when the ideas of freedoms and the rights of man began to evolve and swirl in society, and no doubt in Lafayette's mind. Impressed by his willingness and passion to serve, the Congress honors the young man by awarding him the symbolic rank of Major General. Something that when you hear as a 19-year-old who just sailed across the ocean, you probably get pretty excited to hear about. So naturally, there was a great deal of confusion with this title given to Lafayette, because Lafayette was under the impression that this was legit, he was going to be given his own legion of troops to command, and he was ready. Washington had to kind of step in at their first meeting and explain to the Frenchman that his own division wouldn't be possible due to his foreign birth, But Washington also told Lafayette that he should expect his role to be earned, not given. With the ego and confusion now being put aside, Lafayette was assigned to Washington's military camp as an aide. When the teenager arrived to the barracks, George was embarrassed and apparently apologized to Lafayette due to the state of his troops. But the young Frenchman said it was no worry, and he understood that he was there to learn, not to teach. So to me, what is so remarkable about Lafayette in the States is how he comes to learn about the true definition of liberty. Even as a young man who came from immense wealth, he is able to acknowledge and humble himself down to the new reality he has sailed into. What was that reality? So before we continue down his path in the American Revolution, let's discuss the first 19 years of Lafayette's life and what would lead him to having dinner with George Washington. Lafayette was born in 1757 into a rich aristocratic family. Dude grew up in an actual castle, okay? So let's not make no mistake. In France, Lafayette was a part of the bourgeoisie class that was accumulating so much of France's wealth while a majority of her citizens starved. This is not a personal attack on Lafayette's character, but it's a simple fact that I feel is necessary to bring up given the growing tensions and coming decade of revolution that France would soon face. As a young boy, Lafayette was sent to a top French military school where he was trained to be an officer. His father had actually died in the 7 Years' War from a British cannonball when Lafayette was only 2 years old. I imagine this gave him some sense of a grudge or hatred for the British, and that's, of course, more than the average French person would already hold naturally in their blood at this time. When he was enrolled in military school, Lafayette was exposed to the writings of Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, which greatly inspired him as a young man. The words of liberty and freedom rang true to his soul. This ever-developing rebellion in the American colonies was the most exciting and honorable ongoing conflict the boy had ever heard of. Following graduating from his schooling, Lafayette was assigned to be a part of the King's personal guard. He would meet his wife in 1774, and the two had their first child the next year. In 1776, American diplomats actually came to France to negotiate with King Louis and his foreign minister. The meeting aimed to secure French arms and financial support, as well as probably sending over some military officers to help train the newly formed Continental Army. And surprisingly enough, the king and his foreign advisor were convinced and supported the cause. But then Britain heard of the diplomats' visit and threatened war with France if they were to send aid of any kind, something France could not risk. So, fearing this war, Louis issued a royal decree banning any French officers from serving in America. Desperate and increasingly eager, Lafayette had apparently begged one of the American diplomats to take him back to the States. This would have been direct treason and cause immense political embarrassment to his family. Lafayette's stepfather, who was a powerful duke, had heard of his stepson's attempt to betray the king, so he sent his teenager away to London for 3 weeks to calm down. And when Lafayette returns from what had felt like an exile, he hid from his family and wrote to his stepfather saying that he intended to flee France and join the American Revolution, directly defying the king's orders. Lafayette quickly learned that the Continental Congress, despite wanting him, lacked funds for the voyage. But the young man was still determined. The teenager bought a sailing ship and crew with his own money to make it across the ocean. When Lafayette arrived at the docking yards in Bordeaux, he sent word asking for his family's reaction to the departure. The words truly reached the young man's soul. Still just an 18-year-old, the letters he received from his wife and other family members threw him into an emotional turmoil. Soon after the vessel departed for the States, Lafayette flinched. He ordered the ship to turn around. At the dock, he was met with an army commander who ordered him to report to his father-in-law's regiment. However, before he had much time to think, another French soldier and diplomat who had his own reasons to join the Americans had managed to lie to Lafayette and convince him that the French government actually wanted him to go to the States. He may have also mentioned that there was considerable public support for Lafayette in Paris, which was the part that Lafayette wanted to hear. So, with that, on the 25th of March in 1777, Lafayette's ship boarded and left the harbor. But Lafayette was not on board. He did not go to visit his father-in-law as ordered. Instead, to avoid being caught by British spies or the French crown, he would catch up with his crew in another French docking yard, where they would depart for the Revolution on the 26th of April. The 2-month journey to the New World was marked by seasickness and boredom. It is here, on this long journey, where Lafayette must have realized he wanted this. There was no press, there was no reporters following him. During this 2-month period, he must have really looked back and reflected on the events and beliefs that led him here. One moment in his life that Lafayette always looked back on took place 2 years prior to his dinner with Washington. In August of 1775, a 17-year-old Lafayette was sent to an annual military training dinner in Metz. At this dinner, the young man had the privilege of meeting and talking with none other than the King of England's brother, Prince William Henry. At dinner, a discussion of the ongoing revolt against British rule in the American colonies was brought up. The prince allegedly started to repeatedly mock the American cause, claiming that fighting for the rights of people to rule themselves was silly. Lafayette no doubt had to bite his tongue. This was a moment in the young man's life he would remember. He now realized that his own personal morals and beliefs could no longer be ignored. Along with his ranting and complaining about the rebelling colonies, Prince William Henry also happened to mention how the colonists had recently formed an army under the command of General Washington. For the rest of his life, in the States or in the multiple revolutions he took part in France, Lafayette always looked back at this dinner with the prince as a turning point in his life, and he would later say of the dinner that my heart was enlisted from that point on. This dinner and how it affected Lafayette for the rest of his life cannot be understated. Over the next 2 years, he would make arrangements to make it across the ocean and join what he felt was the most worthy cause of the day. So finally, after evading spies and risking a war between France and Britain, Lafayette and his crew landed near Georgetown in South Carolina on the 13th of June in 1777. Just 2 months later, he would meet Washington for dinner. Months after he landed in the New World, the Battle of Brandywine would take place. On September 11th, 1777, 14,000 patriots and 15,000 British soldiers clashed in Pennsylvania. The British had made plans to occupy Philadelphia and managed to outflank the American forces near the Brandywine River. During the carnage, George Washington sent Lafayette to meet with General John Sullivan and hold out with his forces that were being pushed back. Unfortunately, by the time Lafayette arrived, Sullivan and his men were forced to start a retreat. But it was at this moment when Lafayette attempted to rally the retreating troops and organize them into a less chaotic retreat. While on his horse, motivating the men with his enthusiasm, Lafayette was shot in the leg. A British musket ball passed directly through his left leg, and he required medical attention immediately. Lafayette would reluctantly leave the battlefield, and overall, his actions did organize a more effective and better structure for the panicking soldiers during their retreat. Brought to a medical tent, Lafayette was being treated when his friend George Washington walks in and tells the surgeon, "Treat him as if he is my own son." If Washington or members of the Continental Congress weren't impressed yet, they had to be now. The boy had bled for the cause. Lafayette continued to serve in crucial battles and actually lived with Washington and his soldiers during the Valley Forge encampment of 1777. After France had officially allied with the U.S. in 1778, Lafayette would soon go back to France, where he would mainly act as a diplomat for America, convincing the French government to continue to supply the American Revolution. When Lafayette was preparing to leave from a harbor in Boston in 1779 and go back to his own country, he wrote to his friend Washington, "Farewell, my dear General. I know your heart so well that I am sure no distance can alter your attachment to me. I assure you that my love, my respect, my gratitude for you are above expressions. I more than ever feel the strength of those friendly ties that forever bind me to you." Okay, so that was a quick couple sentences from a much longer letter he wrote to Washington, but those sentences are more romantic than anything I have ever sent or received in my own 23 years on this planet. Also, notably, in 1779, when he returned to France, him and his wife had a son, which the couple would name Georges Washington de Lafayette, which was, in Lafayette's words, a tribute of love and respect to my old friend. Our young man, Lafayette, was now 27 years old, and upon an invite from Congress, he came back to America in 1784, where he was given a hero's welcome. During this visit, he took a small tour of the new country that he had helped to create. Upon traveling around, Lafayette received honorary citizenships from many states, making him and his heirs naturally born citizens. Something that he would actually try to claim while he was stuck in an Austrian prison, but that is for another video. Harvard gave the Frenchman an honorary degree, Boston gave him a portrait of his father figure Washington, and Virginia either awarded him a bust of himself or Washington. Either way, he was probably happy with it. And on this farewell victory tour, Lafayette spent 12 days at Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington, and this would be the last time the two would ever see each other. Unfortunately, we don't have much details of this 12-day bender, but it is touching to know that Lafayette had time to express his gratitude to his friend. The two most likely walked the gardens at the estate and talked revolutionary ideas, as they had done so many years ago at their first meeting. The father and son pair, although never seeing each other again, would remain in contact by sending letters until Washington's death in 1799. Upon hearing the news of his friend's death, Lafayette wrote to Washington's widow, Martha, saying, "My heart is so quick to introduce him in every thought, every sentiment, every concern of mine, that I can hardly believe that, while I am living, he has left us." Lafayette was once again welcomed as a hero in America, taking a final victory tour of the country, this time in 1824. Our young teenager was now a 67-year-old man. He visited Mount Vernon again, this time where the now deceased George and Martha Washington laid in a tomb at the estate. Lafayette was given a private tour of the tomb, where he entered alone and came back several minutes later with tears pouring down his face, having said one final goodbye to his adopted father. The debt that America owes to France should never be forgotten. The relationship that Washington and Lafayette had is often marked as the physical manifestation of the two countries having an alliance today. I want to thank you if you've made it this far. That's crazy. Yeah, thanks for listening. Check out the socials. I'll have them all linked in the description. I hope you learned something.